Hey there, scary story fanatics! Welcome back to Cleaving Thought from Bone with your host, Sociopathic. Hope you all rang in the new year with a bang and painted your towns red, but did you celebrate life or death? Some may argue that each are one and the same, hitched at the celestial hip. So, why not dim your lights and prepare for deadly enlightenment? I reap what you sow.
Most probably wouldn't think so, but I love flowers. So much can be learned from the flower. Never has there been such a definitive representation of life. A seed, small and unassuming, is planted in its earthy bed. Contained therein the darkness, moisture, and a few other essential components detestable to most conscious perceptions of life, and soon a sprout emerges from its rigid cell that initially protected it so. Cells divide, growth begins to occur, and though a waking eye may not be able to see the development occurring right before their very eyes, its shape and form changes drastically day by day. Like an embryo in utero, the earth its womb. And one day, the sprout will find itself emerged from its entombment, peeking itself above the surface of the dirt to find the sky above. Both the glory of sunshine and solemnness of rain will nurture it along its path to flourishment. Wind will blow and try its mightiest to topple it over, but the life and vibrancy of most flowers are prepared for such onslaughts, their roots running deep and strong, keeping it firmly in place and resolute in stature. Genetics and inheritability play a huge role here. The processes of natural selection are cruel to those with deficiencies, killing them off before their prime and denying their opportunity to propagate, ensuring the following generation, spawned by survivors of the previous season, are all that much more vibrant and imbued with strength. For the ones tempered by the hammer of generations and potent in their inherited fortitudes, the sprout will soon become a long, slender stalk. From the moment of germination to the succumbence of death, the conglomeration that is life is fraught with perils and adversities bent on its destruction. These beings are engaged in a perpetual battle for staving off extinguishment of their spark, at times in direct opposition to their environment. In a way, it's all a little redundant, for why exist for the sole purpose of trying to abscond, quit, to fight away such a concrete eventuality? However, there is an admiration in the wholeness of the process, a beauty more precious than gold that can only be cultivated as opposed to created directly. This value, contained therein the process of living, is as full of worth as it is fleeting. For but blink, and that blossomed flower, that blooming rose is now withered and wilted. All petals and leaves decay, the intracellular bonds break down, and mitochondrial processes become inefficient in contrast with their previous selves. The flower is dying. Wait but nothing more than a single breath of time, and the lackluster bloom is gone. All that remains is the decay upon the earth that will soon return to it. If left alone, the species may have done its duty in securing its genetic longevity, but this is only if it received its proper chance. Most repulse at the sight of decay, the visage of death. You may be surprised to discover how few actually resolve to face it, see it for what it is. Like today, for instance, Beatrice surely didn't prove to be an exemption of this generalization, and yet death comes anyway, forcing upon its victim his icy grip. Beatrice, who prefers the name Betty for short, is of moderate age and beauty. She has overcome many adversities that existence has conjured in her direction. Still, in spite of them all, fueled and driven by her inherited strengths and divine free will, she had been the conqueror of her being, shaping her life with her own mind in two hands, not all that dissimilar from the workings of Da Vinci, with his splendorous sculpting hands and knives. Beatrice was moderate of beauty within her species, but, from a celestial perspective, rich in that only cultivatable value of life. Beatrice, or Betty, owns a home with her husband, initially purchased with the intentions of beginning a family of their own, a flower bed of their own making, so to speak. The home is quaint, small if regarded by more aristocratic Western civilized critics, but cozy and perfect from their own stance. It was more than enough than they would ever need, especially if privy to the happenings of more future, or rather past events of late. They had moved in a few years ago, shortly after their diminutive yet picture-perfect wedding. And about a year thus after, seeds sown, little Madeline was born. Fast forward another 6 years, add on a few days thereafter, and you should arrive within your present, my current focus on a time of all times, space of all spaces, but within that accumulation of moments and settings, I decided to take a walk down that very street on which bore that same house of which I have spoken, and within what is now your distant past, did my happenstantial meeting occur. Allow me to divulge my witness of the scenes, imagery, and happenings that played out for my perceptions, like a moving still frame so resolute of its significance, but wholly unaware of its likeness with the leaf that travels both effortlessly and helplessly within a river's flow. Like through a pane of glass, I could see the happenings from within the walls, and the small blonde, Madeline, getting ready for school. "Maddie, are you done getting ready?" Beatrice yelled from down the hall outside Madeline's bedroom. Madeline dodged to the nearby bathroom just outside her door to retrieve a brush with all the morning enthusiasm and vigor that was awarded to one of her age. Carefully, trying not to tug too hard and hurt herself, Madeline tried to battle the challenges of her context and comb her hair the best her less than immature, dexterous hands would let her. "Maddie!" Beatrice yelled once again from her room. Funny, these humans are. One struggles to outshine atrocity and flourish where others may shortly die, and upon triumph, and provided with a chance to nurture, they instead strangle what they covet, like that of a weed. So desperate are the empirical dynamics of fluid life that it sometimes may even trample upon itself to a secure succession and satisfaction. The facilities of the minds supporting behaviors that may even squash the fruits of their labors in an attempt to attain what is already had. Curious creatures, to say the least. Fascinating, to say at most. That little girl of amber locks, unshaken from her joy, responded back to her mother that she was done, jogging down the hall, not a splinter of her happiness gone astray. Mom was found still in her bed, drawing air through a lit cigarette before breathing deep. She barked at her daughter to succumb to being inspected, checking for flaws of appearance rendered by the haste of dressing. Beatrice scoffed when she turned Madeline about and inspected the back of her, finding her hair not up to par with her standards, and respectively the standards of this social paradigm. Mother grabbed another hairbrush from beside her ashtray upon the nightstand, and, cigarette dangling from her mouth, began running the stiff, rigid bristles through tangled locks covering the back of Madeline's skull. The child grimaced at first, before bursting out into shrieks and wails, Beatrice almost uncaringly pulling the bristles through the strangles, ripping through the child's tangles. When Madeline's screams turned to cries, Beatrice's words assured her that she was almost finished, that the task was nearly done and needed to be so. Beatrice took the cigarette from her mouth and snuffed it out in the ashtray, extinguishing what might have been smoked to its full enjoyment. With a hacking cough and a wheeze, Beatrice climbed to her feet and from her bed. Her husband had left for work a while prior, and her task was now to ensure that Madeline was outside, awaiting the school bus in time for its arrival. Time passed, and the duo went about their routine in a normative manner. In whirling by of only glimmers of moments past, the front door opened and prepared for the chilly morning weather. The two stepped outside. Walking side by side down the drive, Madeline played and skipped, happy with life and all its enchantments, and Beatrice beside her, binding her overcoat tightly around her in a desperate attempt to keep whatever heat remained within. She had long since lost that enthusiasm, that zest that seems to be written into the genetic code of every child. Or maybe it's just as they get older. The solidification of stances and fortifications of perspectives leave in deficit the need for play as a modem for learning. In the beginning, they wonder at the marvels around them. As development occurs, they are all self-assured that all is known to them, reinforced by those assurances alone. And as the winter of life descends and the bloomage fades, only then does the relapse of spectacle occur. Once reaching the mailbox at the end of the drive, Madeline was told to stay put while her mother went back inside to fetch her smokes. She never reached them. The door was open and she almost had reached her room, but heard the sound of loud screeching tires from outside the home. Adrenaline pulsing thick through her veins, Beatrice ran out of her apartment that led to the drive. I watched horror and disbelief wash over that woman's face, even as she was running towards the accident and had yet to take in the terror that would only birth tragedy. She asked why, as so many do. Why should be apparent? For a flower is not reaped near the end of its life, nor at its very start. It is plucked at the brim of its vibrancy for the pleasure of enjoying its existence, for however brief it may be. The goal is neither compassion nor preservation. It is simply indulgence, fascination, and the ability to do so. I had been there the whole time, watching them both, and as always, none would land a sight on my presence, for most refuse to see death. And being as I am, I reap indiscriminately, plucking from existence those I should deem fit to stop and enjoy for myself. For a whisper of the wind is all it takes to blow some leaves playfully into the road in a way that entices a little girl to fetch one. And I sure do like the young ones, so plush with vibrancy and life.
So, if people are like flowers, and flowers need sun and water, it stands to reason that people require the same. I suppose that would explain why my basement captives keep dying off. Anyway, if this glimpse at the B-side has left you a little nostalgic, stop by and reminisce with me next weekend. And until then, remember to like, share, subscribe, and turn on notifications so I can catch you all again next Saturday.